to this day.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we can
Yeah.
thank them all. You 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 chose to do political science, and you say we're interested in what was going on. But surely, was the fact that your father studied political science an impact? Was that one of the reasons that you? I assume you never decided to be at one. You never thought of becoming a physicist, for example, right?
I would never qualify. At
But
least is actually, it's wrong to say. I mean, I'm the kind of, I've got the kind of mind that once upon a time we used to say it's the female mind, regards to numbers, and frightened of them. But no, I wouldn't. I didn't become a physicist. I really did want to understand. I think I had come of age in a household that was affected by politics, and so when I was a little girl growing up, our house was very chaotic, and I thought that that chaos was caused by my father's absence. And my father was absent because he had devoted himself to bringing order to the country. And so I thought, well, this was his life goal. This is what he dedicated his life to, and he never achieved it because Somalia didn't go from a dictatorship to a democracy. It went from a dictatorship to a complete anarchy, and it's still in that state. But coming to the Netherlands, I thought, well, how do they do this?
yeah.
If only he could learn their tricks, then
Oh,
maybe, and his colleagues and his fellow activists, maybe they could turn Somalia around to become like the Netherlands.
I see.
But for me to really truly understand that, I thought I had to go to school and understand, figure out, get those answers, and I think I did to a large degree.
Oh, that's impressive. It's impressive that at that age you were thinking so strategically. That is impressive. But you at around the same time you began your faith began to shake, and I want to go into that a little bit. And I was really intrigued that the first person who caused you at least to think about religion as not being an essential part of a good life was Sigmund Freud. Is that right?
Yeah, so this is before I did political
I
science.
know,
Before
I
I
know,
went,
I know, but I was
yeah,
intrigued by that.
I took social work, and there one of obviously a major part of the coursework is psychology. So
Hmm.
you do have to read a lot of Sigmund Freud, and you have
Unfortunately.
to read this, yeah, the conscious and the subconscious,
Mm,
and all things Freud. And I have to say, you could say, I mean, you're really analytical. You could say maybe uh, the seeds for my atheism were planted during that coursework, during just getting through psychology and how the human mind works and all the things that affect you and all. And actually, when I was going to complete those 4 years and become a social worker myself, but then I realized psychology is great if you're applying it to yourself.
uh-huh.
But if you're leaving this environment and I'm going to solve other problems, other people's psychosocial, that's such a tall order, and get me out of here.
Ah, okay. But you did. Okay. Well, no. Again, it's strategic. I'm impressed. But you at least. But I also Freud, and I'm no fan of Freud, but that
I'm
he
not a
taught
fan
you.
of.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But at least give an example that you could have a moral system that wasn't based on God. And I think that's really important for people to realize that you can be moral without God. And my understanding was that he gave you the first inkling that that's possible, but that may not be right.
Well, it starts with then if you apply some of those things to yourself, not like a religious person would
Yeah.
apply Holy Scripture,
Yeah.
but in the sense that it encourages you to ask questions, and that the questions that I was asking before I came to
Yeah.
the West, that some of those questions were actually justified. Remember, I come from a background where if you ask questions, you're seen as antisocial, as rebellious, as trying to cause problems. And so it's best not to ask questions. That kind of curiosity is always it's frowned on and smacked down very quickly. So being in the Netherlands and in this environment where we're getting homework, what compare Freud to Ellis? What are the differences? What are the similarities? Uh, I was just in heaven with that.
Yeah, no, the idea that you could ask questions. Yeah, you used to be. It used to be that you could ask questions in education. Maybe one day will again. But I mean that's and I'm intrigued by several times where you point out that and something that I couldn't agree with more as a scientist that asking questions about our social situation is an essential part of trying to make it better. And so even if you're not a physicist, you have a very scientific mentality, which is
Yeah.
questioning, looking for evidence, continuing to question. And I find that throughout your writing, and that's really kind of amazing. And that just came out of a love of questioning? It wasn't maybe out of your academic studies as well, or?
No, it's absolutely the academic studies. But I think when you look at, you're a physicist, you look at these, the hard sciences, true science, really.
Yes, I'll agree.
Yeah. You get these definitive answers. So something is either true or false. But in what is called the social sciences, that doesn't exist. That certainty does not exist. And my professors, my teachers in the Netherlands would really insist on that all the time. From the beginning of the lesson to the end of the lesson, we would be reminded there is no definitive answer to this. There are some ideas, once translated into practice, that are better than others, but none of them are perfect.
Okay, well, that's great, and all of them many have different positives. But I mean, I haven't done your level of immigration or being an immigrant. I've moved from one country to another, but it's an experience that teaches you that exactly that not only is no society perfect, but different societies have different good things about them, and it's just. And this ridiculous nationalism that people have, that one place is the best place in the world just because the accident of being born there, as opposed to being born 300 miles away. It always amazes me now when I see that.
Absolutely. And to get really to my religious criticism or awakening, it began, let me say, I was asking these questions about why is the Netherlands a place you want to come to? Mm-hmm. And Somalia, a place you want to leave. And then with all of these other people coming from different countries, during my 5 years in political science, the one subject I loved the most was political theory, where there were all these ideas on, what are the best organizational and institutional methods to put society together that give the best outcome to everyone within that society and in relationship to outsiders. And so when my father would say Sharia law applied as it should be. And so then I would look at countries that apply Sharia law. This is Saudi Arabia, it's Iran. There were other attempts that were made in different places like Nigeria and Afghanistan. And I thought that's far from the truth. It's unappealing. People are forced to do things they don't want to. It's based on fear.
Yes.
And threats and lies and secrets. And so that's not a great theory for society. These secular theories are. And then from there, you just can't, once these questions pop up in your mind and you embark on this path to find out what they are, figure out what they are. Remember, nothing is perfect.
Yeah.
But some ideas are better than others. And I just couldn't help but think, the Sharia law, it wouldn't give me what I want. It wouldn't give us what we want.
Oh, okay. Okay. And you're right. I'm biased, but I can't help but think that once you start to think, it seems hard to imagine remaining religious.
It becomes empirical because there were masses and masses of refugees from theocracy of Iran in the Netherlands and elsewhere, and they want refugees from the Netherlands going to Iran seeking asylum.
Yeah, it's true. It's a good empirical fact, I guess. Well,
but
partly you can. Well, yeah, but partly, to be fair, let me play the devil's advocate. You can also be fair and say one society is richer than the other, so why would you want to go from rich to
Why did they get richer?
Yeah, of course. They got that absolutely. We'll get to that, in fact, actually.
No, the Dutch were killing one another the other day as Protestants and Catholics. There was more bloodshed in Europe than anywhere else.
Yeah, it just took a little longer to get, they're a little...
Yeah, they were all mini Afghanistans.
I've always said the problem with Islam is it's just 600 years later, and it's just, maybe one may hope, although I'm not sure, one may hope in 600 years that people will be as... that being a Muslim will be the same as being a Christian in the sense that you won't believe any of the doctrines. You'll just like to call yourself that, which is what most Christians do. Mm-hmm. I want to move away from this a little. I want to get to the book, but you also, it was around 2001, but then a little later that you read the Atheist Manifest, Atheistisch Manifest of one of your professors that really caused you to give up religion. Is that right?
First, I had a boyfriend from 1996
That'll do it.
all the way to 2001. That's when we broke up. And I think it was good for both of us. But
Hope so.
confrontations on a social level, so law level confrontations between Muslims and non-Muslims were happening all the time. And I thought, the most important thing for me to do is to avoid it. So sometimes my Somali friends would call me and I wouldn't call them back. I wouldn't socialize with them because they reminded me too much of that world I left behind. And I wasn't ready to tackle it. I wasn't ready mentally to say, am I now a Muslim and where do I stand? And my boyfriend would say, I don't even understand why you bother with that when religion is just such nonsense. He was this convinced atheist.
He was Dutch, or he was?
He was Dutch. He was Dutch. And I was within a group, Leiden University, we graduated together. Most of them were atheists. And in fact, to be an atheist was the sort of elite establishment position. And people who believed in God were mocked and seen as, and I felt that was too arrogant. And anyway, when we didn't break up because of this, we broke up for other reasons. But then I moved on and had a new boyfriend, and this is the author of the Atheist Manifest. Yeah. He didn't only tell me, he didn't just say, that belief framework, whatever that is, you shouldn't be asking these questions. He just gave me his book.
I said, read it.
Read it, and I actually read it.
Wow.
And
lucky guy.
Yeah, and it's a small book, but it's a great book. And I say it's a great book because it did for me exactly what I was seeking, which is ask all these questions. Don't fear the answers, just explore and see where they lead.
Great.
I don't want to say it's a humble book, but it's a good book.
Yeah, no, that's great. To teach, well, you've heard me say before that teaching by questions, asking questions is the only really good way. And absolutely right, because you can't convince people of a lot of things, but they can convince themselves by asking questions. Yeah. Continue questions. That's excellent. You all, not only do you become a sort of an atheist ultimately, but you also partly as a result of September 11th, 2001, you also began to become particularly critical of Islam and around that time, right?
9/11 happened.
Yeah.
And I think that was a big deal. You were grown up at that time and realized what happened. It was a very big deal. And I think there were a lot of people in my environment, in the think tank environment, academic environment, who were trying to figure out, why did these 19 men do what they did? What is it that motivated them? And it was just a laundry list of reasons people gave, Israeli, Palestinian politics. None of them were from Israel. None of them were from Palestine. Then it was American foreign policy, and then it was colonialism, and then it was this and it was that. And I said, what about if it was just conviction? What if they actually believed on a religious level that what they were doing was right, that this is a declaration of jihad? And I didn't realize the reaction from my liberal friends, the atheist friends, that was seen as just a really dangerous way of thinking about it.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
But then that then led me to, and there was a fascination with it. So even though I was condemned for asking those questions loudly and writing essays and articles about it, the journalists wouldn't stop inviting me to their radio shows and TV shows and newspaper interviews and so on. So there was this paradox of, please don't ask that question, but you do it. So you can make a freak out of yourself by.
We'll help sensationalize it. Well, that was good for you. Good training.
Not everyone was a sensationalist, but I think that the question of, so are you a Muslim yourself? That popped up in a radio show where she let me go through all the steps of criticizing Islam and women, Islam and power, Islam and this. And then she said, what about you? Are you still a Muslim? And I made the huge mistake of hesitating and then saying no.
Oh.
And that then opened the doors to threats and...
Yeah, you started, I mean, we all know the death threats you've had because of not only associated with the movie, but the books. And when I remember the first time I met you, but
started with the public declaration of leaving Islam, because as an apostate, it's every Muslim's duty to kill you. So in that sense, I think it is, it's the other criticisms are fine, but that is, for me, that's a major sin or major crime I've committed, is the public expression that I'm no longer Muslim.
So you had already begun to have experienced death threats. So when you really became under threat of death, you sort of were more used to it. Maybe it was a little less traumatic, but I don't know. I can't imagine it wouldn't have been critically traumatic. And as I say, I've been with you, and I remember the first time. I mean, surrounded by security guards, and it's a tough going. But it's amazingly important to be brave enough to do it. And anyway, it's interesting that you've always spoken out about those things you believe in. I was intrigued. I want to go slightly, and this will also be relevant to think about immigration. You started working for a think tank which was center-left, and then a labor think tank, and then you moved to a political party which was center-right, and eventually moved to the American Enterprise Institute, which one would say, I guess now one would call it center-right. When I first visited, I would have called it right. But and so there was an evolution at the same time, maybe towards left to right, or have you, or is it just that you've remained the same and the political definitions have moved? What would you say?
I would say I probably remain the same to a large degree. I still believe, so if you look at the conversation, the controversy between center-left and center-right, if you look at society's problems, how much of it should be left for society to resolve versus how much government should be bringing in? I think in that sense, I am solidly in the center. I believe that for some things you really do need the government. For others, you should leave it to the market and society, civil society. But when you look at the problem of integrating immigrants from cultures and societies that are very different, this left-right dichotomy, that framework of trying to understand it doesn't work. And what I find, and I'm very angry upset with my center-left friends, is that they actually used the narrative of compassion and the government should do more, not to help the immigrants assimilate, but to stay in power and to expand their power base. And so they to me became so cynical. And the cynicism back in 2001, 2002, when I'm with the center-left think tank, is expressing itself in, but we need their votes. So if you go out there and you upset them, we're not going to get the votes. And that was the trade-off. Now, the other side, the VVD, the center-right party, were prepared to say, morally and from a place of compassion, the Netherlands should continue to accept asylum seekers and family reunion and bring more immigrants in. They were willing to accept that, but they wanted to apply tough love. And that, I think, in that sense, I would say, even though the left-right framework thing doesn't work for the escalation process, but the center-right groups were way more interested in dispensing that tough love approach. And that tough love approach has been demonized to a point where it's a lose-lose situation. So immigrants don't get to assimilate and get absorbed into the labor market or, the values and norms, and they're causing lots of problems. This book, it focuses on what is changing for women because of immigration in negative ways. We can't talk about it because the whole tough love package is seen as monstrous.
Oh, okay.
And the other
Well,
side, they don't have an answer. They just want the votes. And so that's very, very upsetting. And it's
yeah.
not different. It's worse in America than it is in Europe.
Yeah, well, that the problems of it. Of you did say somewhere in the book, I'll get to it, that dealing with immigration in Europe now is more to the right of the United States in a lot of places. But we'll get to that. Um, the but you do. But the point is that to deal with immigrants, you need. I mean, the one thing you would agree with is that government play. You can't. Government it plays the primary role in dealing with trying to help immigrants assimilate. It's not the private industry or the private sector that does that or should do that.
The government should, so the government is in charge of who comes in and whether they stay legally or whether they should be deported. So government is in charge of evicting the people whom they have decided are not allowed to be in the country, and then providing, and here I think I'm more of a social democrat than, but providing the resources for then creating some of these courses that civil society can't do. That is the case in Europe. In America, I think the history of assimilation in America is very, very different. But in the Netherlands, for example, other European countries, it is government that provides these resources for language classes.
Yeah.
There are some private language classes of superior quality to what the government provides. But then if you're just an asylum seeker entering now, you can't afford those classes.
Sure.
And so there's that. I mean, I want to navigate that. Who do you pay for and how do they pay back and so on?
Yeah, no, I mean, Europe provides those services that the United States just doesn't, and then suffers for later
Yes.
by not having provided them. People tend to think it's a way of saving money, but in the end, it's
Yeah.
it's a fool's way of saving money because you.
It's a fool's way of saving money. But also remember what I told you. It wasn't the caseworkers paid for by the government that were responsible for my assimilation.
Yeah.
I made friends and I made an effort to try and get through these language courses and navigate. That was done by friends.
But your preference would be, if you don't mind, but your preference would be somehow to have a government system that did what your friends did for you.
No, my preference would be in the space that the government controls. So an asylum seekers center in the Netherlands is a government-controlled, government-paid-for space. And if within that space you start with initial steps, and as an individual leaves, now you are being housed, I think it's then the responsibility of the individual. And I know that there are numerous, every country you go to, numerous volunteers, people who are not paid by anyone, but who want to do good. And I think then it is part of the responsibility, and I think you should hold an individual immigrant accountable for what have you done, what are the steps that you have made to improve your own life. And asking those questions and trying to figure out the best setup is not, it's not apostasy. Mm-hmm. These are real questions, but what you run into all the time, including I live in the Bay Area, and San Francisco is rotting. Michael Schellenberger, who loves San Francisco and environmentalist, he's written this book called San Francisco.
Yeah, I know the book.
Mm-hmm. So we run into the same problems of there is a large infrastructure of people who take government money and promise to solve these big social issues. They don't, and they oppose those who want to do it differently. And so this isn't a unique, I think it's an affluent society problem.
Well, it's a problem. It's interesting. I don't know how influenced I was, but I just did it'll come out after this one, but I had a discussion with Charles Murray, and he, of course, as you know, because I guess he's a colleague, and at least he's a colleague at has claims to have done a lot of studies to show that there's limited influence you can actually do in a lot of these programs, and he's been vilified.
And I'm a fan of Charles Murray, and I also and Shelby Steele and Thomas Sowell and all of these guys who looked at at blight in the United States of America, particularly within African American families, even though Charles Murray also actually looks at poor white families.
Yeah, sure he does.
The breakdown of a number of institutions and the correlation with blight, with homelessness, drug abuse, family breakdowns, all sorts of traumas, That's now well documented, and I think it is it's immoral now to hide away from that truth and to pretend that preparations for slavery that will resolve the problem, or just this fixation on racism. In America, we fixate on racism, and in Europe, they fixate on colonialism. Why is it that so-and-so has abused a woman? He hasn't been to work. He's on government welfare. What can we do about that? And they start conversations about colonialism.
Yeah, instead of, and it's, you're finding these explanations that have nothing to do with the specific causes for this person, and labeling them as something else. And yeah, and it's interesting. We'll get to, you have a chapter also. It's culturally, or at least you're part of a chapter, individual responsibility versus group. The sense of victimization, which you've argued in some sense is also built into Islam, but we'll get there. I promise we'll get there sometime in the next 6 hours. Anyway, but before, I was intrigued by the AEI. I've never asked you this personally. I remember when I heard you moved to AEI, American Enterprise Institute, and I'd been there, as I think I've told you, and I lectured there, and then eventually I thought it went well, and then I was told afterwards that I shouldn't come back. But anyway, I thought it was a coup. I thought, for me, it was the first example of what I thought of as the right usurping issues that were the left. But now I see, for the most part, the left have abandoned those issues. But I saw the right taking you in as this as a very brilliant publicity. Not maybe not publicity stunt, but I'm wondering how that AEI thing happened. If you don't mind talking about it. If you do, it doesn't matter. We can move on to other things. But it was a brilliant move of someone's part.
So, the Netherlands is a small country, and I don't think that the AEI in 2004, 2005, 2006 were paying a lot of attention to the Netherlands. I don't think that. What happened is when Theo van Gogh was killed, it's November 2nd, and in the
made a movie? Who you helped make a movie with him? It's very famous. He was stabbed, and this movie submission. You were helped make it, and that was a major international event. So I knew that.
Yeah, this was 2004. I was in Parliament. My term was going to end in May of 2007. The cabinet made it through. We have a coalition system in the Netherlands, so you don't know if the cabinet is going to make it through to the next election. And if it was going to make it through to the next election, I didn't want to pre-seek election. I actually hated being in politics. I think I hated being in politics because I idealized, I came out of political science and thought that's what it's all going to look like, and it wasn't. It was different.
Yeah, no. You can say what you believe. You can say what you think if you're not a politician, and if you're a political scientist. But when you become a politician,
this whole pursuit of the truth and critical thinking, and once you go into Parliament, you realize, oh my gosh, it's the opposite. Yeah. So I decided I wasn't going to seek the election, and I was going to do something else, which became very clear very quickly to me and everybody who cared about me that I couldn't do that in the Netherlands, that I had to go somewhere else, get out of that pressure cooker. I was surrounded 24/7 by security people. I was being moved from safe house to safe house. It was pretty dramatic. At one point, I was moved out of the country to be safe.
Yeah,
while
incredible.
Still serving in Parliament. So that was very odd. Anyway, I had made up my mind, and I started applying for jobs in the US. I went to Washington, D.C. with a Democrat friend of mine, and we started shopping for a think tank that I could work for, who would accept me. And we went to the Brookings Institution, we went to the Rand Institution, she took me to Georgetown University, she took me to George Washington University. And then at the very end, she said, I have this friend at a place called the American Enterprise Institute. And I remember recoiling and thinking, no, not there. And she said, but he's a Democrat, and his name is Norm, and let's just go see what they say. And everywhere I went, we did this whole interview thing, who are you? And they fully understood the picture. And Carlin Bowman, who's still with the American Enterprise Institute, said the Iraq War was raging. and I was expressing what I thought about it. And she said, do you want to write a piece for the Wall Street Journal? And I did, and it was published. And then she said, we'll follow up very quickly with you. And before I knew it, the president back then, Christopher Demuth, Chris Demuth, who's become such a dear friend, he was the president, and he said, yeah, we're going to follow up. And he talked to me. We had, I think it was lunch or dinner, and he did this due diligence interview and that whole background. So this is in 2005.
Wow.
And then the others never got back to me. The Rand Institute came back and said, you don't do what we do, so I don't think it's a good fit. But none of the others, even though they expressed admiration, none of them wanted to have me. And then I went back and forth with the president of the American Enterprise Institute, and he said, as soon as 2007, do you want to start tomorrow? And I said, no, I have to sit. I've got to wait until the next session. He said, when that happens, just give me a call, and we'll work out the process of getting you here. And that's how it came about. The cabinet fell because of my passport, and there was this scandal. I had been accused of lying. A documentary was made. And this is what I think, another thing about my bitterness and anger with the left, people on the left, is they don't like your arguments, they don't like your questions, they don't like your theories, then they set us to demonize you.
Yes.
And that demonization process was unfolding, and that's precisely why the think tanks on the left didn't want to have me, because I had been framed as a rabid right-wing Islamophobe. So when I called him and I said, well, here's what's happening, and there's this whole scandal, do you still want me? He said, absolutely.
Okay.
And that's
More
how
than
I
ever.
ended up with the American Enterprise Institute. He went to the board of trustees. And everybody there was true to their word, welcoming, compassionate, and went into this overdrive to help me get immigration papers settled, because you have to, vouch for the person. And so my experience there is I'm now part of the family, the AEI family.
That's wonderful. Well, I always wonder whether it might, I'm obviously behind you, but because at the time I thought, Wall Street Journal, and now, 14 years later, the place I publish is the Wall Street Journal. And
well, the Wall Street Journal is amazing. If I send them a proposal that they think is rubbish, they literally say that.
Oh yeah, that's right. But
rubbish, we're not going to do it.
But the difference, but what,
Send them
but
something,
neither.
They'll publish it. But
it's exactly. They're open about that, but at least they'll publish it. But what one finds is exactly what you said: is the left begins to demonize. I used to write for the New York Times. I used to write, and now the places I publish I'm now called a right-wing pundit. And it's kind of amusing for me to see that as a relatively left-wing. But you've experienced that. So there's two aspects, again, of things that have been really on my mind a lot, which is cancel culture and this nonsense about offending. I just wrote a piece for the National Post in Canada, which is the Wall Street Journal of Canada, I guess I could say, and which I also send you on offense. But you were canceled. So you wrote about that in 2006 in a speech I think you gave in Berlin about this, the importance of the right to offend people as a fundamental right, and you're way ahead of the game as far as I was concerned. As far as my own thinking, and then you were also canceled in 2014. You had an experience which again a number of us have had, I think getting an honorary degree and then having it withdrawn. In my case, one of the honorary degrees was withdrawn sort of privately, not publicly, so it never became a scandal. But you've been a part of both, and so of that vilification process and cancellation process, which is so nefarious today.
Yeah, and I had a lot of. So first of all, the cancellation and free speech confrontations that I was a part of was all centered around insulting Islam and Islamophobia, and this attempt by a minority group in Europe and in America and in Canada and other liberal societies who were saying, we want an exemption just for ourselves. It's okay if you want to insult Christianity, it's okay if you want to insult any other kind of ideology or religion, but we just want an exception for us. And so when I gave that speech in Berlin, it's when that whole controversy broke out in Denmark, with the 12 cartoons, and Elon's Post and the newspaper that published them was either being vilified or, how do we deal with this? And I remember being really in the epicenter of that hurricane of a controversy, and then thinking, well, I think it is very, very important to go and state, and I don't even remember what else I said in the essay, but my headline, which the group who hosted me wanted to change, was, no, I'm here to defend rights to offend. That's the rights First Amendment defends when you talk about free speech. It's not about good manners. And I love good manners. I think there's no need to offend for the sake of it. But the ideas that offend, that's what's protected. And so you can't get away from this by saying we're going to avoid. And I think my message was, if you really, truly, truly accept Muslim minorities, you're going to make them a part of that. And then fast forward, here we live in the United States, and we don't have only a small group of immigrants who identify as Muslim who don't want their religion to be insulted. We now have all sorts of groups, women's groups. We have who are saying, I don't know to what extent women are a group in any way, but the demand is this with the Me Too, that if I accuse a man of sexual misconduct, I, the accuser, is always right. You're guilty until you're proven guilty.
Yeah, that's right.
And I thought, how can that be good for women? That's terrible.
What a novel thought.
Yeah, we can't. No. That's not how it works. It is, I want to have an environment and an infrastructure that allows me as an accuser not to be vilified and victim blaming, and to be protected from that sort of thing. And if that's in a court of law or the court of public opinion, he has the benefit of the doubt, surely. And we should engage in this, truth-seeking mechanism to reach, to get to the point where if the accusation is justified or not. But that's one. And then there's the transgender community. And I don't really think that individuals who are transgender are the ones who are seeking all this attention, but there's a group of activists, very militant, and probably the most dangerous of all of them. They're not like the Islamists trying to blow things up, but boy, are they causing trouble. And I would say, I always want to ask the transgender activists, why on earth would you take the smallest minority and set them up against 50% of the population? Because when they come after women, like the numbers are just not right. I think we can work this out, and so on. And so, what is to stop then other religious minorities from saying, and I want an exception too? What is to stop all these fights that have been happening since time immemorial on a class level for everybody to claim some form of exemption from? And then how does that make us a society? And what makes it different from tribalism? Because if you go to Africa and places where you have the tribe based on bloodline or the clan, that's exactly what it is. It's just, you have the in-group and the out-group.
Well, this is a perfect segue. The idea of why should people have exceptions to the notion of the fact that we have to recognize that we can't give a free pass to people on the basis of religion or some guilt. And so I want to get there. I want to move. That's a perfect way to move into it. I will say, by the way, you're not allowed to use the word tribalism anymore because that's also offensive, apparently. As I just wrote in an article, the Journal of Hospital Medicine censored and removed an article that had the word tribalism in because it hurts people.
My response is, and I think it should be yours and everyone's, is I use any word that I want to use.
Oh, absolutely. Well, when as I said somewhere, but I almost wrote it in a piece, but I didn't. But when I was a little kid, we used to be told sticks and stones will break your bones, but names will never hurt me. And that's how we used to sell it people. But in any case, and the other thing, I don't know if I ever told you, but I actually got one of those cartoons in a physics paper I wrote. So somewhere I have one of the, I shouldn't say this because maybe there'd be a thought for, but I did change some of the words, but it's in one of my physics papers. I felt ethically obliged to try and put it in a paper around that time.
I have to say to you, I have more Muslim friends than 20 years ago, and these are true Muslim friends, not because we're in the same in-group.
Yeah.
And they come from everywhere, and we all agree on, my Muslim friends and me, we agree on going through that period of time when questions were asked. And the Prophet Muhammad, the founder of Islam, was criticized, and the Quran was criticized, and authoritarianism in the name of Islam, all kinds was criticized, and the way women are treated was good. They said that has actually really been the best thing to happen to Islam, because you see now more and more young people moving towards an attitude of critical thinking and asking questions. And without giving up their Muslim identity. And so it's really
That'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be great if it's true. I haven't seen it, but then I'm not as part of it as you are. Well, look, the idea that no group should get a free pass is combined with your ultimately your scientific attitude, the right to offend. Truth hurts, but who cares?
Yeah.
Too bad. And you wrote once, I wrote this down because I loved what it said, is that communities cannot reform unless there's a, quote, scrupulous investigation of every former and current doctrine. What a wonderful mantra, and of course a scientific one as well. But I think if that were true, which is in my mind a scientific approach to the world, then it would be better.
Renkuosi Actimel ne tik dėl LKC bakterijų.
Renkuosi Actimel ne tik dėl skonio, o taip pat vitaminai D ir B6 nėra pagrindinė priežastis. Mes geriame Actimel dėl svarbesnės priežasties.
Rūpinkis savimi ir savais. Actimel.